In August of 1963, Martin Luther delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" speech in front of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., one of the most famous speeches in American history. And I want to just take a clip of it and show it to you, because at the beginning of the section, he uses the language of banking to describe the promise of America. And it's very interesting to hear him talk about it, because it's almost as if there's been an inversion of that, especially since 1971, a false use of that language to talk about freedom. So notice how he talks about cashing a check and a promissory note and insufficient funds and the Bank of Justice not being bankrupt, and what it means to actually make good on the promise of America to the people of America. Just check this out.
In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. So we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice.
I just really love that. I mean, here we are in 2024, many years, 60 plus years after he gave that speech. And the promise of America is still not realized. It's not realized fully. It's not realized sufficiently. The Bank of America is not a bank of justice. It's a bank of injustice. It's a bank of exploitation. The things that bank purchases are not liberty, life, and the pursuit of happiness. It's police abuse, fraud, military-industrial complex, and the overhaul of American industry, the outsourcing of it. I think it's just so poetic to think about. In Scripture, it talks about how the sins of their fathers will be passed on to their children and their children's children to several generations, and how, I grew up in the South. I grew up in Alabama. I grew up where there were slaves, where white people enslaved black people and thought that they were better because of their ethnicity or their skin color, and the sin of ethnic superiority, which is a major sin today. It's not so much of a sin among Europeans or among Africans or among Chinese or Japanese, but there's a very small country in the Middle East that does think that they're superior. And they were often the ones who were promoting slavery, and they're also the ones who are now at the top of banks, enslaving us all and having us enslave ourselves. Not because they think that that's the best way to live, not because they think that this is a prosperous way to live. It's because they don't think that we deserve to have any freedom. They don't think that we deserve to own any property. They don't think that we deserve to have any happiness because they're so empty inside. And as Martin Luther King said, freedom is never given by the oppressor; it must be demanded by the oppressed. And he also had a great line in the I Had a Dream speech about how we must not become militant. We must remain peaceful in our pursuit of freedom and liberty and happiness and justice. And so as I'm sitting here on the week of the sheriff coming in to violate my property on behalf of a judge who's bought by the banks and a legal system that, just like in the times of slavery, did not treat black people as if they had any rights at all, certainly no rights to be educated and to defend themselves. Here we are. I mean, what is that? 1864, 100 years, that's 1964, so like 160 years. That's 280s. That's significant when you think about the turnings. It's basically the fourth turning, right? We're 280s past the end of quote-unquote slavery. And I feel like there's going to be something different. I feel like the promissory note of America, what it stood for, maybe not the country, but what that promissory note stood for, that man's rights, his natural rights to think and to live according to his judgment, that if he works and makes good on his property and his life, that he may live, but if he does not work, he'll starve, but only on his own. That there's room now for compassion because justice reigns. Like, I feel like we're right on the edge of it. And so I hope you've enjoyed joining me in my journey, and I hope you enjoyed this speech by Martin Luther King. And let's end the Fed. Default on debt. Your debts are forgiven. Thanks.